Good evening. Welcome back to the CreepyPastaK.A.T. I am your host, Kat. Now, before we get into our little game of creepypasta roulette, I will explain my little hiatus and absence. Now, I know I've taken a leave for a while, and I wanted to be able to get back into things, but the reason why I really wasn't on for a while was because I had surgery. I had top surgery, and I've been healing from that, and kind of getting back into my regular day job as well, as I just finished my second full week back to work. And, I had to, with my living arrangements where I am, I had to move my little recording studio somewhere that's, in a more open space in the living, in the place I live in. And it's very difficult to really find a good time where there aren't people around, so there's no distractions or, extra noise in the background. Especially now because, this is a live recording that I'm doing right now, and due to the lack of, soundproofing in the area, it's very challenging to get a really good professional grade, kind of record that's, worthy of being uploaded. And I think these live sessions are better because, you can fully anticipate when something like that is going to happen. So from now on, I think just for a little while, I want to do these live creepypasta relays. And so, without further ado, I guess I should jump in because this has been a long introduction. So, this is now the second live creepypasta relay that I've done. And for our first story, it seems that we have got Behind the Veil. And the story is from The Zomber. There are some things that are not part of the world of the living, questions that should never be answered, places that should never be discovered, but there will always be fools who will try to, and those who do suffer a fate worse than death, worse than any torture ever conceived in the dark corners of the human mind. One such place lies deep beneath the ground in an unreachable cave, its entrance hidden, invisible to everyone, except those who are cursed. After a 3-day descent towards the source of the foul air, wandering ever further from sunlight and its warmth, you reach a vast opening, an empty hall more grandiose with its size than any king ever was. With only one object in the very center from the entrance of the hall, it looks like a large stone pillar. But once closer, you can clearly see markings on the stone. These markings form the outline of a door, but can be deciphered by no man. They are written in a language that predates all. Those who reach this door are unable to turn back or look away, oblivious victims of the evil that lies in wait. It is this unknown force that compels them to examine the pillar closer. Not a single thought crosses their minds. Loved ones are forgotten, and a secret desires neglected. With the first touch, the stone crumbles. All dust and broken pieces fall into its dark abyss it was sealing. A veil of shadow forbids you from peeking through to that other side. Torches are extinguished and all light fades to nothing as he who stands before it feels the void, sucking out the very warmth of his body. In a few moments, you are allowed to remain in the world of the living. You become aware of your impending doom, the horrible fate you have brought upon yourself. Your mind has now gone blank, an empty vessel, mere puppet, waiting for your master to give you the order to take the last step, and plunge into the abyss. And without hesitation, you obey. There is no pain behind the veil, no happiness or sorrow, no anger, no emotion or sensation to experience lies hidden in the infinite abyss. There is only one existence in its purest form, enduring, timeless, eternal. Devoid of all stimuli, all external feedback from the environment, from its own body, the mind gone insane. Those who are lucky lose their sanity before they can cause any more harm. They are to remain their prison. They are to remain in their prison, their isolation from all, to last for all eternity. You, however, a voice that belongs to neither a man nor a woman, offers you an escape. In exchange for your freedom, you must speak the names of 3 people. 3 people you love, 3 people you would give your life for. The voice will then show them the same dream that brought you here, and you will be returned to your home. Some, despite their feeling their psyche crumble in a final moment of lucidity, manage to remain silent, realizing the truth. You will, frantically searching for an end to your torment, give the voice the names it demands. You thought that you could return and warn your loved ones of the horror that awaits them, giving you hope. But the voice only knows lies and deceit. It abandons you, and you are once again left alone. Only now, you are now left knowing the fates that awaits of those who follow their dreams, those once cared for, but soon no longer even remember. Alright, so now let's choose our second story for this evening. Let me click that, and while it loads. Alright, so now it looks like this story is called The Woman in the Oven, and it is written by Anonymous. Okay. During the summer of 1983, in a quiet town near Minneapolis, Minnesota, the charred body of a woman was found inside the kitchen stove of a small farmhouse. A video camera was also found in the kitchen, standing on a tripod and pointing at the oven. No tape was found inside the camera at the time. Although the scene was originally labeled as a homicide by police, an unmarked VHS tape was later discovered at the bottom of the farm's well, which apparently had dried up earlier that year. Despite its worn condition and the fact that it contained no audio, the police were still able to view the contents of the tape. It depicted a woman recording herself in front of a video camera, seemingly using the same camera the police found in the kitchen. After positioning the camera to both her and the kitchen stove in the image, the tape then showed her turning on the oven, opening the door, crawling inside, and then closing the door behind her. 8 minutes into the video, the oven seemed to be shaking violently, after which thick black smoke could be seen emanating from it. The camera then continued to stationary point at the oven for another 45 minutes until the batteries apparently died. To avoid disturbing the local community, police never released any information about the tape, or even the fact that it was found. Police were also not able to determine who put the tape in the well, or why the physical stature of the woman on the tape did not in any way resemble the stature of the woman found in the oven. Alright, now let's go on to the next story. Let me click the random button on the website. And it looks like the story that I will be reading is called Demon of the Outback. And it is written by Cassandra Wolf. Alright, let me just scroll back up to the top so I can start reading. If you give me a quick minute, I'm going to take a drink, so it's water, trust me. Okay, let's begin. I've spent a good portion of my life out in the Australian outbush. I've spent a good portion of my life out in the Australian bush, long enough time that there is very little left out there that can surprise or scare me. I've tussled with massive scrubber bulls and lived to tell the tale, and I've even come across good-sized king brown snakes and funnel web spiders that would spend most city people running with their tail between their legs. I have learned to not be so arrogant about knowing the bush now. The land has proven that it still holds many secrets, most of which aren't meant to be known. It started during 2011, right at the end of the wet season. We only had just started work again, as seeing flooding and dangerous conditions made work too risky. There was enough grass and water for the cattle, so it wasn't a concern other than to worry about how much stock we lost in the flood. The first thing that indicated that something was wrong rather than insidious. We started to find dead cattle in the paddocks. We didn't think much of it at the time, merely hauled the carcasses away the minute we could get to them. Young stock die all the time after all, whether it was snakes or feral dogs, or even just exposure to the elements. We weren't sure. We just assumed it was nothing and continued with our jobs. Then a pair of horses died, along with one of the cattle dogs. A snake bite could have explained it. After all, there are multiple poisonous reptiles in the outback, but it was the way we found the carcasses that made us scratch our heads. They had been torn apart. Feral dogs didn't come near the house where we kept the dogs and horses, even with those a lot of dingo blood in their veins. Even those with a lot of dingo blood in their veins were wary of humans. But what else could it have been? Australia isn't one for large land predators. Soon it became nothing but a campfire talk. However, as the weeks passed without any more signs of the elusive predator, we were starting to get into the mustering season, and we were starting to get into that mustering season, and as such hired a few farmhands and jackaroos to help with the cattle, and didn't have time for idle conversation. It was one of those musters that the creatures struck again. Not a cow or a horse this time, but one of the jackaroos. He went galloping into the scrub to chase out a few stray steers, and although the cattle came racing out to join the mob that was starting to form, he and his horse didn't. We searched for him, but never found any sign of him. People were starting to grow worried about whatever it was that lurked in the darkness. We were far from civilization, with nothing but our horses and saddlebags on us. We heard the feral dogs howling at night. There were a fair few on the station, most with a strain of dingo in them. Pure dingoes were rare now in the mainland, but most of us slept with a gun in our hands. We doubted it was a dingo that was causing all the trouble, but what else could it have been? One of the men with us seemed extremely anxious. He was an Aboriginal in origin and had been raised in the native folklore of bunyips and demon dingoes, which he relayed to us over the fire. We laughed it off, of course. Native stories have always been treated that way, unfortunately. Either way, he wanted us to head straight back to the house, which was still a few days' travel from us. The following day was silent. We remarked on it as we rode, for such silence was unusual in the bush. There were always cockatoos and other birds causing a ruckus, along with the multitude of insects. Lizards would sunbathe on the red rocks and skitter away when disturbed. There was nothing at that moment. The land appeared dead. The horse and cattle seemed skittish to toss their heads as the whites of their eyes showed. One large bull took off from the mob, racing into the undergrowth with a bellow. As I was one closest to it, I was the one who had take off. Sorry, the page is idling for a second. Alright, so let me start back from where I lost my place. As I was one closest to it, I was the one who had taken off after it. I moved warily, not scared of the predator who seemed to be stalking us, but of the bull itself. They were dangerous when cornered, after all. I wasn't the only one after the bull. I soon learned a dingo racing free from the undergrowth and bellowed into the bovine. I'd never seen a pack of feral dogs take down a bull in the prime of its life, but here was a single candid doing so without any trouble. It was obviously a dingo. No dog could ever come close to having the same presence as rust-colored wild dog that was native to Australia. It was massive, though, more than twice the size of a normal dingo. And its eyes, it looked up when the bull fell limp, eyes of red, the desert sand, and burning with the strength of a flame. Its teeth were bloodied as it bared them at me. Stalking forward with its tail raised. I was frozen, staring at the monstrous dingo in shock. Thankfully, my horse was less so, and with a panicked, whiny mount, I turned and galloped as if the demons were at its heels. I could hear the dingo snarling behind me, but it didn't glance back until I was free from the shrub. Until I was free of the shrub, and at the risk of outpacing the men I worked with. The shrub was real. The shrub was still as dead as a grave, whatever that thing, for it can't have been a dingo. No dingo looked like that thing had given up the chase. I never spoke of what had happened to that day, no matter how many questions people plied me with. I also refused to look at that rock art on our property. The ochre pigments worn with age. The yellow faded, but its shape was still distinguishable. It appeared that it had been wrong of me to ignore the native tales. The rocks proved that with an age, old paintings of a massive dingo with rubied eyes. Okay, now with that story done, I think we will have time for one last story, so without further ado, let's see what we have in store. Alright, it seems that the story I will be reading will be called Little Fingers. And Little Fingers was written by Nuzzle Bunny. Okay, now that I'm back up to the top of the page, let's begin. Tiny goosebumps, ice tingling up the spine. These sensations lingered, the only means of knowing that someone was watching. No, not watching, stalking. For how long? He didn't really know, but he became aware of this presence not a few hours ago. In that little cafe with the clever wooden sign that hung above the door, Desmond had picked out a spot at a table by the window, lazily flipping through his copy of the latest digital arts magazine. He absently grabbed for the latte beside him, and he was just about to take another sip when he spotted a hair landing in the foam. Lately, it was become sort of an ongoing joke that perhaps his hair thought he wasn't getting enough protein. At least that's how it appeared, since fending off the short, auburn strands from getting into food seemed now a familiar nuisance. Still, mild irritation quickly subsided when he came across the article he had been searching for. The article in question was a spotlight piece the magazine had published on his art career. Throughout the whole interview, he was surprised, skeptical even, that they would want to write about him. Well, there it was before him, between vibrant and glossy pages. He even groaned a little at the accompanying artist photo. Having been torn between two photos at the time, he had now wished he'd chosen the latter. Regardless, the finished article is still beautifully written and complete with several of his works. He was proud to see that most of his favorite pieces were there, but upon turning the page, his heart quickly froze, for taking up the entire following page was a picture that he had not recognized. They made a mistake, he quietly cursed under his breath, inspecting the image carefully. Anyone would agree that his art has always been on the more dark side of things. He was one of the people who came to when they needed macabre or monsters for their projects. Yet, try as he might, Desmond could not even recall ever painting this piece, which was comparatively more creepy than anything he had ever attempted. However, striking similarities between this artist's style and his own made the piece nearly indistinguishable, except for the fact the content was more minimal. Within the painting, the viewer stood in a plain, dreary room, looking at the only other things there: a large, cracked, and solid smearing window framing a pitch-black night outside. Desmond noted out loud that the artist's skillful and pragmatic use of black, gray, and the earthy tones that created this almost photorealistic quality. He searched for the title and quickly found it on the opposite page, in a small italicized font, "Nightmare" by Desmond Freeman. It was clearly a mistake, but somehow it felt eerie. It was at that moment he thought that he spotted something else, something tucked away in the darkness of the brushstrokes, something on the other side of the glass. It peeked through the bottom corner in a color of a pale white face, or at least a small fraction of what looked like to be a face. Only a single eye could be seen peering in, bulging intently through the matted, rain-soaked hair, as black as the night outside. Each strand clung to its clammy skin limply, its stare penetrating. A sense of maddened fear hung from the tension of the long, dirtied nails of little fingers paused in the act of slowly prying open the window pane. He closed the magazine, perhaps in disgust. The creepy nature of the article seemed to have thrown Desmond off, causing him to hesitate and momentarily dismiss the sensation of eyes fixed upon him as being all in his head. Still, with each passing moment, the unease steadily grew. Committed to the conclusion that the culprit was likely someone in the cafe, and upon quickly raising head, Desmond scanned through the vacant venue. The few people around didn't appear to be paying him any mind, though. A group of 3 teenagers sat in the booth at the back, chatting loudly amongst themselves. Otherwise, the only other patrons were an elderly couple, quietly drinking their coffees and sharing a scone. Even the people on the bustling city streets outside treated him with the same distracted disinterest as usual. Yet the unsettling feeling stayed. It lingered to the point where Desmond decidedly packed up his belongings into his bag and headed towards the park. So it was here on the park's weathered bench that Desmond presently sat patiently, waiting in the hopes that his suspicion would be confirmed. He hunched over and shifting around on the uncomfortable wooden slats, with steely blue eyes focused downward towards the pavement. He quickly watched as an ant made its way up the cup of the unfinished latte, which sat on the ground beside a pair of beaten-up Converse shoes and the few tufts of stubborn grass, before clumsily falling in. The path was in dire need of repair, he had determined some time ago, but was apparently still in use. Occasional echoed footsteps of joggers announced their approach, but would always pass by uneventfully. Mostly, though, the park was silent and empty, not a soul around save for the birds. He paused for a moment to pull out his cell phone and glanced down at the clock. He hadn't been aware of the time, though it didn't feel like long, he had definitely been sitting there for at least an hour. No doubt this reminded him that Melanie had reserved a table for them at a new restaurant they had been meaning to try. If he left now, he'd still have time to head home and shake off his nerves. Last chance to come out before I leave, he tried, just in case, but as he expected, there came no reply. He sucked in his tongue loudly in frustration and tugged at his loose shoelaces before rising to his feet. The parking lot was not too far, but along the way he made sure each step was deliberately slow and dampened in an effort to listen close for footsteps following him. Yet, much to his relief, no one appeared, and he even slightly chuckled at himself for allowing such silly paranoia to get under his skin. Confidence renewed, he reached into his jeans for the keys and groaned when the metal teeth caught on the fabric lining. They slipped in slow motion and hit the pavement with a loud, metallic thud. He bent down swiftly and scooped them up, but it was upon standing up that Desmond dared glance back towards the bench, and once more. And for the second time that day, he froze in place. Shadows of the dense thickets made it hard to see at first, but his eyes managed to pick out the chalky paleness of sallow flesh that reflected off the sun setting, and little fingers barely distinguishable from twigs that parted the leaves to reveal my smiling face. Alright. That concludes all the tales for this evening. Thank you for sticking around and listening. I wanted to remind you that since this is a live show, and the whole meaning behind the Creepypasta Relay is to essentially have stories chosen at random for me. These are stories that, I've never read before, and so as, they choose and load, as I read them, this is the first time of me experiencing them. So obviously I'm going to have some slip-ups with my words, as, I've mentioned, and, you've probably heard over the stories, if you listen through them. Well, that being said, I think it's important to leave that kind of stuff in, since, this is completely unedited and a one-shot, go for all. So you're going to hear me, mumble a lot or misspeak or, not speak certain words correctly and, drink some water and stuff for my throat and whatnot. You're going to hear little background noises and everything, and, that's how it's going to be. It's a live show. I'm not editing anything. And, well, with that being said, I will be leaving the links to these stories down in the comments below, or, whatever that little section is, the description box of, the video. And I want to thank you for sticking around and patiently waiting for me to make a new video. I will try to upload at a regular schedule, but in the foreseeable future, we'll see what goes on. And, in the meantime, you can always look back on my old videos. And I did want to mention that for the time being, I'm not on Podbean right now. I had to unfortunately take that down for some financial reasons. And it will soon be up again in a few months, so I will let you know when it is. And it will hopefully have all my old videos as well as, newer ones. So, until next time, stay spooky, my darklings and cats.